What's up, everyone? I'm Nathan Graham Davis, and I am here with Sarah Hawthorne, Jennifer Gordon Thomas, R. Michael Gull, Paul Moon, Mary Hickox, and Sabrina Suarez to bring you a live reading of my new script, #HETHER. If you haven't seen my re-entry series, I wrote this script over the last 6 months in an attempt to re-break into Hollywood after being out of the business for 6 or 7 years. I documented my process over 25 episodes and interviewed 25 pro screenwriters to get their insights along the way. So if screenwriting or filmmaking are of interest to you, you're definitely going to want to check it out just for those folks alone. But the plan for some time now has been to cap this all off with a live reading of the script. And so on that note, I'm super excited to have this amazing cast on board. They've put a ton of work into turning this into something special. So without further delay, here's #HETHER.
Breathe in. Cracked lips, scabbed and leaking a thin breath of air. Not many more left behind it. Closed eyes, blood-streaked and swollen. No will left to open them. Mangled limbs, broken and woven like wicker through the spokes of a giant wooden wheel.
Domine, non est exaltum, cor meo.
Exterior churchyard day. The woman hangs from the breaking wheel, which sits on a post several feet above the ground. Rope cuts into her splayed-out wrists and ankles. Mutilated and waiting on death, her sex is knowable only for that she is nude. She is a warning. A wooden sign impales the bright spring grass before her, a single Old Norse word painted in blood. Superimposed witch. A stone church juts out behind her, the only rock-built structure for miles. It is more than a house of worship. It is the village center, a sanctuary, the home of law and justice. Solemn voices speak a psalm from within.
Nike elati sunt oculi mei.
Exterior, outside Litlakoppinger day. A striking vista of snow-capped mountains and a dark conifer forest. Rivers that seem the source of life itself snake their way into an ice-blue lake at the heart of the valley. Superimposed 1220 CE, Litlakoppinger, Norway. At the lake's edge lies the palisade-walled village of Litlakoppinger, 20 or so homesteads with the stone church at its center. It is tiny against its backdrop, and it is isolated.
Neci ambulavi in magnis.
Interior church day. Dank and dark with scant light from small windows. Men sit with bowed heads upon rough-hewn benches, worn smooth and shiny by the ages. They wear Sunday tunics, plain and blue and nearly uniform, but free from wear and tear. Fathers, sons, and brothers they recite in unison.
Ecce et mirabilibus super me.
Papi Horgor stands at the front, a stern force of God, powerful and well aware of it. He wears similar dress, but it is finer, with a wooden crucifix hanging from his neck. He reads from a Vulgate Bible on the dais.
Si non humilitater sentibian.
Wide on the sanctuary, we see now that the men only sit along the left. On the right are women and small children, heads also bowed, with linen veils covering the hair of each woman over 12. Their tunics, also blue, fall well past their knees, and when the congregation moves to speak again,
Sed exaltavi anima meam.
the women remain silent, stiff, as if their presence is scarcely tolerated.
Sicut ablactatus est super matre sua.
Two young women sit alone in the last pew, their tunics gray like the stone wall at their backs. Matching blonde hair pokes out from beneath their veils. The oldest, Skara, 18, casts a sideways glance at her sister. Lena, 13, has her head bowed like all the others, but she is far past solemn. A fresh black eye and a busted lip, she bears the weight that goes with them. Skara has the look of one who has been there many times before, and who has somehow survived it. She subtly raises her hand and makes a mouth with her fingers, mimes the congregation as they chant.
Ita retributio and anima mea.
Lena catches it. The corner of her mouth tilts into a smile. She can't help it. She snickers. Skara drops her hand, goes rigid. The shoulders in front of them tense up. That wasn't good. Papi Horgor raises his voice, making a point as he glares in their direction.
Speret Israel in domino.
The look in his eyes is clear. They'll pay for that. Skara waits for his focus to shift, then checks one last time to be sure Lena's got it under control. Beyond her, on the left side of the church, Eigen, 23, meets Skara's eyes out of the corner of his own, then glances away. He's tall and handsome, at least from this side, with a build earned from hours in the field. His shoulders, however strong, are slumped and drawn in. As the congregation prays the last line of the psalm, his face betrays sadness.
Ex hoc nunc et usque in saculum.
Papi Horgor lifts his arms to God, a man in his element.
Amen.
Moments later, the women remain still as the men file out from the front row back. The wave reaches Eigen and he turns toward the aisle, giving us the first full look at his face. The left side is horribly scarred from a gash that never healed right, his mouth an inch too wide and fixed in a permanent frown, the likely remnant of some childhood mischief that changed his prospects forever. He catches Scara's eye again. She gives him a subtle smile. He looks away, follows the crowd out the door. Later, Scara sweeps a broom across the floorboards, her movements quick and practiced as she works her way across the back of the church. Hearty male voices spill through the open windows from the congregants who have yet to leave the yard. Hands and knees, Lena scrubs the boards before her.
He fancies thee,
Home.
Master Eigen. Whom else?
Lena dips the rag into the pail beside her, wrings it out.
It is not but a scar, Scara.
Who said anything about a scar?
Why else wouldst thou pay him no mind?
Enough of thy foolishness. Scrub.
Scara continues sweeping and Lena resumes her scrubbing, their backs to each other.
Thou art the foolish one.
Scara rolls her eyes and sweeps.
What is he going to do, Lena? With an orphan with no dowry?
He might, better than no wife at all.
Scara stops sweeping, turns to her.
He wishes to ump me, Lena. I ask no more want of that.
The heavy wooden door opens from the outside. She resumes her sweeping, casts her eyes down. Papi Horgor steps to the door, closes it behind him. He stops in his tracks and stands there, staring at Lena's backside as she scrubs, lingering, leering.
Lena.
Lena stops, keeps her eyes on the floor, petrified by the hunger in his voice. Scared's grip tightens on the broom.
Thou violated the sanctity of the Mass.
I beg thee mercy, Papi.
The church homes and feeds thee, and this is how thou repays it.
He pauses for effect, enjoys the power of his own voice. He touches the crucifix on his neck and continues to stare.
Confess thy sin, and I will grant thee a penance, one that truly serves the church.
Papi?
The priest reels at her. She swallows, commits.
It was I who sinned, not Lena.
Lena turns her head, appalled at Scara's action.
I will atone and serve the church.
Papi Horgor considers her, his lust not yet redirected. Disgusted by herself, Scara runs her hand down the broomstick phallically. Interior rectory hall night. Papi Horgor stands naked, the dim light of the dying fire at his back. He dips his hand into a bowl, washes his genitals. Scara steps through the open chamber door behind him, wearing only her shift, her head hung in shame. She passes between him and the hearth without a word.
Scara,
She pauses, keeps her back to him.
thou served well.
He flicks his hand dry.
The weight of a village's woes can be crushing.
Without another word, he turns and heads into his chamber. Scara resumes her walk across the hall to the sleeping platform at the far corner. Lena lies there already, awake and tucked beneath a sheepskin. Scara climbs in beside her, spoons her. They lie there a moment in understanding silence.
Does it get better?
Never.
Lena gives a slow, resigned nod.
I fear it.
Scara strokes her hair.
I will protect thee, sister.
God hates a liar.
Go to sleep.
Scara kisses the back of her head. Interior rectory hall day. There's a knock at the door. Papi Horgor looks up. He sits at a table by the window, the open vulgate before him, a rosary at his side.
Scara!
Scara pauses her food prep, wipes her hands on her apron.
Aye, Papi, I'm coming.
She crosses the hall, passes Lena, who hangs wet laundry on a line by the hearth. She reaches the door, opens it. Eigen stands on the other side, a basket in hand. His speech is slurred by his disfigurement.
Good day, Miss Scara.
Messer Eigen?
He passes the basket to her. She takes it and hands him an empty one, which sits with several others by the door.
You eggs short today, I fear. I'll be that plenty of gold bread.
That will do, Eigen. Gramercy.
Skara nods.
Gramercy.
Eigen smiles at her best he can, holds a moment as if searching for something else to say.
Good morn, Master Eigen.
And to thee, Miss Lena. The chandler's widow is in town if thou hast need for candles.
I shall be sure to check our stock.
Another smile, an awkward pause. Eigen nods.
Good day, Miss Skera. Poppy, Miss Lena.
Good day.
Good day.
Skara shuts the door, carries the basket back across the hall as she passes Lena.
He does fancy thee.
Holger lifts his eyes at her silly, cheery tone.
Again with thy foolishness.
Lena leans behind a hanging tunic, blocking Holger's view. She whispers, the smile still big on her face.
A home and children of thy very own.
Enough.
Lena stops hiding, takes another tunic, and hangs it.
Thou shouldst welcome it.
Enough, Lena.
Aye, that is enough.
The priest looks on from his seat by the window, his gaze remaining on Lena for just a moment longer than natural. She breaks eye contact, returns to her work, uncomfortable.
Skara, take 10 pennings and go find the widow.
She exchanges a quick, concerned look with Lena.
She will surely visit our door before she leaves, Pappy.
He pounds on the table, and the young women shrink back. He's not a man of empty threats.
I will not chance being without light for a month. 10 pennings from the church should be more than enough for 5. Go in on and do not let her cheat thee.
I will join thee.
Nay, thou wilt stay here.
Skara meets Lena's eyes. She's frightened. Exterior Littlecopinger day. Skara hurries down the road, her gait just shy of a run. The only road in town, it is lined on each side by Nordic longhouses, thatched roofs and central halls, with workrooms at one end and stables at the other, and pens or paddocks adjoining those. Bare gardens stretch back behind them. Beyond those, the high wooden palisade reaches for the gray skies above. Villagers mill about. Skara nods as she passes, but quickly averts her eyes. She does not want to be stopped. She follows the sharp curve of the hill, leaps the mud in the ruts as she goes. The road straightens. Up ahead, a raven pins a toad to the ground, tears flesh from its belly with its beak. It sees her coming, bursts into the air, admonishes her with a guttural squawk. Skara pays it no mind. She fixes her gaze down the road where a tall woman leads a tar-black mule to the gates. She gets within earshot and calls after her.
Mistress!
The woman does not turn, but keeps on pace toward the gate, silver hair flowing from beneath her veil longer than the women of the village keep it. Past 50, she suggests a strength uncommon for her age. She is Valdala, and her eyes are sharp as the dagger at her hip. Nearer, Skara calls again.
Mistress, I pray thee!
Valdala slows, turns, sees Skara coming toward her.
I has sold out my stock, lass.
She keeps moving, the mule along with her. Skara catches her, walks in sync.
I pray thee, if thou have candles for the road or not fit for sale.
Not fit for sale? Ye think me wares cheap? Nay, even if I did, I wouldna sell them to thee.
The gate is not far off. Skara makes a decision. She darts in front of them, brings them to a halt. The mule brays, Valdala glares.
I cannot go back without them.
Ye art betwixt me and a long day's walk, lass. I might not be violent, but I cannot speak for my mule, nor that raven.
She lifts her eyes. The raven circles overhead, gives another guttural squawk.
Thou art the prester's ward, nay? Did I not sell him a dozen last I was here?
Aye, ye didst, but it is not the candles he wants. He is alone with my sister.
Valdala nods, her face grim in understanding.
How old is this sister of thine?
13.
Then she is of age. Today it is candles, tomorrow it will be fetching a tithe from the blacksmith. Ye cannot protect her.
Valdala starts forward with the mule in step. Skara won't budge.
I will do what I can.
Valdala studies her.
Wilty.
Aye.
She releases the bridle of her mule, puts out her right hand. It is missing its index and middle fingers.
How many pennings has he?
10.
Skara opens her hand, shows Valdala the coins. Valdala drops her hand, incredulous.
10? How many did ye expect? Never mind. I has but one.
Skara hides her disappointment, nods. Better than nothing. Valdala turns to the mule, opens a bag that hangs from its back. She reaches inside and pauses, whispers something under her breath. She turns back around with a beeswax candle in hand, streaks of purple running through it. Not what Skara was expecting.
Lavender. Bring it to thy prester. Be sure he is the one that lights it.
Gramercy.
It must be him.
Aye.
The pennings?
Valdala extends her disfigured hand. Moments later, Skara hurries back up the hill, the candle clutched in her fingers. She's drawing attention now, doesn't care. Interior rectory hall day. Skara bursts through the door. Pappy Horgor sits at the table, studying, just as before. Lena has moved on to food prep. Skara stands there, door still open, confused to see everything's okay. Pappy Horgor watches her, also confused.
Well,
She snaps out of it, shuts the door behind her.
Alas, Pappy, this was all she has. But it is very fine, made with lavender.
Lavender?
what use hast I for lavender? How much didst thou pay?
All of it, Pappy.
The priest nods, extends his hand.
Hand it here.
She steps up, hands it to him.
She said thou should be the one.
Crack. Pappy Horgor strikes the candle hard across Skara's face, snapping her head back. The candle splits in two. He drops the end in his hand on the floor.
Serve male et pigger, thou art worthless.
Skara stands there, unable to look him in the eye, a bruise already forming on her face.
I am in need of rest. I wilt expect a hot meal when I wake.
Horgor heads to his chamber, shuts the door behind him. Lena goes to her sister.
Let me see.
Skara holds her hand up to stop her, wipes her tears away.
I am well. Thou art safe.
Lie down a moment. I wilt take care of things.
She points to the sleeping platform at the corner.
Dose.
Gramercy, sister.
Skara goes to the platform, picks up a sheepskin, lies down and pulls it over her. Lena bends down, picks up a half of the candle, brings it to her nose. She smiles at its pleasant scent.
We wilt cleanse his stench with lavender.
Skara looks up. Lena crouches by the hearth, the broken candle in her hand. She lights it on the fire.
Lena, wait.
Lena turns to her, and her forearm bursts into flame. She shakes her arm frantically.
Lena!
Skara bolts off the bed, runs across the room. The fire is out before Skara gets there. She grabs Lena's arm, checks it, breathes a sigh of relief.
Thou art all right.
Lena coughs. Her eyes go wide in fear and pain.
Skara!
He falls back to the floor, coughs, convulses. Black smoke pours from her mouth and her nostrils.
Lena!
Blue flames lick out from behind the smoke as Lena hacks and screams. And flails. Skara runs for a pail of water across the hall, grabs it. Pappy Horgor wrenches his door open as she does.
What is going on out here?
His eyes go wide as he sees for himself. Skara ignores him, sprints back toward Lena, her screams now dead as the fire bursts from her throat. Skara douses her in the water, and flames erupt from Lena's chest.
No!
Skara glances around, sees the wet, hanging tunics. She grabs one, throws it over her sister, tamps it down, and holds it there in pure desperation. Lena stops moving.
Lena?
Terrified, Skara peels back the tunic from her sister's face. She reels away, lets out a cry from her very soul. There is a charred, gaping hole where Lena's nose, jaw, and throat were. Her eyes are untouched, fixed in anguish.
Witchcraft.
Skara looks up, sobbing, sees the horror on his face.
Thou.
Nay, Poppy.
The priest makes an involuntary glance at the door. His foot twitches. Skara doesn't think. She reaches for the hearth, grabs the iron fire poker. Bobby Horger sprints for the door. Skara stands, swings, cracks the priest against the back of his skull. He drops to the ground on his back, barely conscious and moaning. He finds her with his wavering eyes.
Devils. Whore.
His words unleash her hatred and heartbreak. She stabs him in the chest with the fire poker, then again in his throat. Blood bubbles from his neck as he tries to staunch the flow. Skara drops the poker, covers her mouth, appalled at what she's done.
Krister?
She rips the linen veil from her hair, stuffs it into the hole in his neck. The blood still pours. He coughs and gurgles, and he stops. Skara sits back, brings her hands toward her face in shock, sees they're covered in blood.
Krister.
She stands, sees her sister again, lets out another sob but restrains it. She goes to the window and peeks out onto the road. With the shutters open and no glass in these times, there's a chance someone might have hurt. But all seems clear. Cut to, Skara washes the blood from her hands in a bowl of water. Cut to, wearing a gray woolen cloak, Skara rolls up items in a sheepskin. Bread, flint, a knife. She ties it with cord in a way that leaves a strap, slings it over her shoulder. Exterior, Littlecopinger, field day. Late afternoon, beneath a silver sky, Skara crosses the bare earthen farmland, making for the palisade several hundred feet away. Her gait is brisk, her eyes fearful, but she never once looks back. Exterior, Littlecopinger, outside the palisade day. Skara's head rises from behind the stockade. She looks over the edge. It's a good 12 feet down. She swallows, pulls herself up, throws a leg over the tall hewn beams, and then the other. She hangs over the side a moment and drops. She hits feet first and collapses, winces at the impact.
Ah!
She catches her breath, gets back on her feet, tests her weight on them. She winces again. One of her ankles took the fall pretty hard. She'll make it. She turns from the palisade and hobbles away, the dark wall of spruces looming ahead. Exterior, forest, outside Littlecopinger day. Skara wipes her eyes. She moves through the understory, not far from the forest's edge, climbing over and ducking under huge fallen trees. Littlecopinger rises from the clearing in the background. The road leading away cuts through the woods up ahead. Skara glances over her shoulder for a look at the village gates. All is quiet. She turns and steps out onto the forest road. Little more than a well-worn path, she heads away from her home and leaves her life behind her. Later. Dusk closes in as Skara pushes onward, streaks of salt beneath her eyes. The road here seems to follow the base of a mountain, the forest rising sharply to her left. A wide stream, swollen with snow melt, interrupts the path ahead. Remnants of a bridge fight the current on the other side. It's fordable, but not without risk. She stops at its bank, crouches, cups some water into her mouth. It's the first relief she's had in hours. She splashes some on her face, washes the salt away, then sits back on the gravel. She gazes upstream at the gushing cascade, lets herself breathe. Firmly twilight now, it's as good a place to stop as any. She takes the rolled sheepskin from her shoulder, sets it on the ground and unties it. Cuts a chunk off the loaf of bread and eats, surprised at how hungry she is. As she savors it, something catches her eye. Orange torchlight on the trees in the direction from which she came, growing brighter by the second. She gathers her things, wraps them in the sheepskin, leaps to her feet. She dashes into the woods. Clambers down the hillside, hides behind a fallen tree some 30 yards from the road. The orange light grows brighter. She peers through the brush as three torch-wielding men on horseback slow to a stop at the stream, one with a sword at his side, the others with axes. They shout to each other above the roar of the water, their words unintelligible. Skara sets her bundle on the ground, opens it. The knife is missing. On the men, Bjorn, the leader, turns to the men behind him, Gorm and Ulf.
One at a time. Ugh, she looks angry.
He flicks the reins, moves his horse into the churning water.
Wait.
Whoa.
Bjorn pulls on the reins. The horse stops, backs up onto the bank. Bjorn turns to Ulf, who dismounts.
What?
Ulf bends over, picks up Skara's knife. He turns it over, inspects it, shows it to Bjorn.
Nary a speck of rust.
On Skara. She watches as they lift their heads and scan the woods around them.
Krister.
She gathers her sheepskin, prepares to move. On the men. Bjorn holds his torch high at the opposite edge of the road, peers up and into the forest. Everything is dark.
Over here, footprints.
Bjorn whips his head around. Gorm points at Skara's footprints in the stream-side gravel leading downhill and into the trees.
A girl, no doubt of it.
Gorm hops down from his horse. Bjorn does the same, goes to tie his to a tree. Skara scrambles downhill, the bundle tucked beneath her arm. She stays low, does her best to stay quiet. The men step off the road and into the woods, their weapons drawn, their horses tied. Their torches set the tree trunks aglow, casting huge spikes of shadow ahead of them.
Stay vigilant.
He stares into the darkness and bellows.
Little witch!
Skara glances behind her, sees the torches as they gain on her. Unlike Skara, the men have no need to move silently. She keeps going, makes for the stream at her left.
Come out, little witch. Ye cannot hide from Krister.
She reaches the raging water, looks back once more. The men are 60 feet away at best. She takes a breath, resolves herself, leaves the safety of the bank, and plunges. Ankle deep, mid-calf. A third of the way across, the rapids pull at her knees. Loose, hidden boulders scrape and rumble beneath the surface. She struggles to keep her footing. Midway and thigh-deep, she fights at the water. The torches threaten, not far into the woods. She's 2/3 across, now only knee-deep again, and when her foot finds a hole in the stream bed. She sinks to her waist and is swept off her feet. The current tumbles her, rips the sheepskin from her arms. She reaches for it, misses. The water carries it into the darkness and dashes her against the rocks. Her arms flail. She finds the tip of a downed tree. Grasping it, she holds on and pulls herself to her feet. She catches her breath, casts a hopeless look downstream, climbs onto the opposite bank. The men parallel her now, voices inaudible, their torchlight only just hitting the water. They continue downhill. She's safe. It's also dark. The Nordic night is alive with crickets and owls and a slow but relentless wind. Skara is soaked, clothes dripping and hair plastered against her scalp. It's cold enough that her breath fogs the air. She wraps her arms around herself and scans the forest, as if the moonlit conifers might have an answer. They do not. With the torches disappearing behind her, she trudges uphill toward the road. As she nears it, a crunch in the duff behind her. She spins around, pierced through the black. Not 20 feet away, huge and dark and looking right at her, a wolf takes cautious, deliberate steps in her direction. Skara freezes. The wolf also pauses, watches her, waits. Skara crouches, keeps her eyes on it, feels around the forest floor and finds a rock. She whips it at the beast, misses.
Go! Be gone!
The wolf does nothing. She feels around for another rock, finds one, throws.
Go!
It connects. The wolf yelps, snarls, backs away a little. Skara does the same. She backtracks a few steps and turns, and leaps out of her skin. 3 more wolves stand before her. They eye her for a split second, then charge. Skara runs, sees the 4th wolf behind her. She grabs a limb on a nearby tree, climbs, pulls herself out of reach as the wolves snarl and nip at her feet. The largest leaps up the tree, digs its nails in, manages to scrape up the trunk a ways. Skara recoils, tries to climb higher. Mercifully, the wolf slips back down the tree. The pack howls. They circle below. Skara's trapped, shivering, terrified. She tucks herself into the notch between the branch and the trunk, curls her knees to her chest. She spots movement out of the corner of her eye. A raven lands on a branch to her right. It cocks its head, meets her gaze, then turns its attention to the wolves. It lets out a low, guttural squawk. They stop in their tracks, look up. On seeing the bird above them, they snarl, take a few steps back. Squawk. The snarls give way to whimpers. The wolves tuck their tails and run, out of sight within seconds. Skara looks back to the raven, eyes wide.
Fuel kingy.
The bird flaps its wings, hops to the ground below. It turns to her, squawks again, as if inviting her to follow it.
What art thou doing, Raven?
The raven flies into the air, lands a few feet further up the hill, stares at her once more. Skara checks the direction in which the wolves ran. The moonlight only lets her see so far, but they seem long gone. She glances back to the bird. It remains on the forest floor, staring. Something compels her. She lowers herself from the tree, pulls her feet on the ground, takes a step toward it. It flies into the air, away from her. She watches a moment, shakes her head, annoyed she could have been so silly as to think it was communicating with her. But then, the raven lands only a little farther up the hill. It turns to her once again. She steps after it. Exterior road night. The raven flies across the forest road, disappears into the woods on the opposite side. The stream cascades in the background, the horse is still tied behind it. A moment later, Skara steps out from the trees, follows after the raven. Exterior stream side cliff night. Skara now navigates a faint path along the edge of a cliff. Her clothes remain wet, but her breasts are heavy and sweat beads her brow. She uses a tree for balance, peers over the edge, 70 feet below. Moonlight glints off the stream. Squawk. The raven sits on the rocks up ahead, impatient. She follows it. It flies off the cliff and darts back into the woods. Exterior forest path night. Huge trees and canopies block out the moon. Skara stumbles up the slope in near darkness. The raven stays close, leads her along the path. She crests the top of a hill. Silver light pokes through the trees up ahead, where the forest meets an open glade. The raven flies ahead and she follows. There's a dark mass at the center of the clearing. It's a home, a small wooden longhouse with cozy orange light leaking through the cracks in its shutters. Skara stops just short of the edge of the wood. Another source of light catches her eye, this time below her. On the ground, the moonlight bounces off black, glassy stones, obsidian. Fist size, arranged in a line and partially hidden by ferns and scrubs, they suggest a ring that encircles the entire glade. The raven calls at her from a few feet inside. Skara can't help herself. She steps across the stones and into the glade. A bee buzzes by her face, then another. They circle her a moment, then fly off into the night. She's in a clearing some 50 yards wide and backed against a scrubby cliff face with the terrain sloping down to the forest on all sides. Water trickles from the rocks above, forms a stream that meets the glade and leads into a dammed-up pond near the edge. There are a handful of outbuildings, a shed, bee skeps, and something that resembles a gazebo. The house sits at the center, with warm smoke rising from its thick thatched roof. The sounds of the night have not died, but it feels quieter here, protected somehow. The wind has all but ceased. The raven leaps into the air, flies across the glade, and lands at the foot of the door. Skara follows, her steps cautious. The raven raps on the door with its beak, at a pocked, weathered spot where it's clearly done this before. The door opens. Valdala stands inside, the glow of the hearth behind her. She smiles as the raven hops onto her outstretched arm.
Hail, Alsvartar, and hail thyself.
Skara's face twists in surprise and fury and heartbreak.
Yea.
What didst ye expect, guided here by a raven?
She lifts her arm and the raven flies into the house. She watches it go, turns to Skara and smiles once more.
That is Alsvartar, and I am Valdala. Welcome to our home.
My sister!
Interior, Valdala's home, night. The fire splits and crackles from the center of the hearth. Valdala dips a ladle into the kettle that hangs above it, fills a bowl with pottage. Skara stares at the fire from a bench by its side, huddled beneath a sheepskin. Her wet clothes hang on a line nearby. The hall is jumbled, unkept, the extension of a busy mind, and not one that plans for company. Pots, vessels, and other tools lay about, but it's comfortable. Valdala hands Skara the bowl.
Drink up, lass.
Skara takes it, drinks. Her anger has faded, but she makes no attempt to speak. Valdala moves to the counter, takes a bowl for herself.
I am grieved to hear of thy sister. My intent had been to help ye both.
She returns to the kettle, fills the bowl.
All be that, I am glad to hear of the Prester.
I hast committed myself to hell.
That is one belief, aye.
She takes a seat on the bench beside Skara.
Lena will walk the kingdom of heaven with no throat to speak, nor lungs to laugh, nor mouth to eat and drink.
Valdala sips her pottage, allows Skara to have a moment. She chews slowly, swallows.
The blue fire, lass. What was it?
Skara keeps her eyes on the orange flames before her, takes a minute before answering.
Fjolkingi.
Aye, Fjolkingi. A power beyond the natural world. The power of the old ways. In all thy priester's prayers and psalms and rituals, have ye ever seen such a display from Christer?
Skara says nothing, shakes her head.
Thy sister's soul lives on, intact and at peace.
A
A trace of hope crosses Skara's face. Something about the witch's words ring true. She looks up, meets her eyes.
Can thou help me see her?
All Fjolkingi bears a price, lass. There are some that are not worth paying.
Didst not Lena already pay it?
Alas, that is not what I do.
Valdala sips from her bowl, watches the fire.
What does thou do?
Make candles mostly, tend my bees and my crops.
Skara passes her eyes over the hall's dusty wooden floor.
For a witch it seems thou hast little use for a broom.
Nay, that is an amusing myth, that.
Witches do not fly then?
Certainly not on brooms.
But thou art a witch.
I study Fjolkingi when time allows for it, which is not so often these days, but that is the price of living this way, and that is a price I pay gladly.
Valdala sets her bowl on the bench beside her, a mouthful or two remaining. She looks up, makes a kissing sound at Alsvarder, who's perched on a beam overhead. He hops down to the bench, eats what's left of the pottage. Skara watches them, gets it.
Thou hast freedom here.
Aye.
Show me a spell.
I hast already shown thee one, lass. Not a moment ago ye were chilled and drenched and stricken by perhaps the worst day of thy life. And now look at ye. Aye, there is even something of a smile on thy face.
Skara touches her lips, as if expecting to find something there. She looks at her bowl, wondering if perhaps her food was enchanted.
Come, I has the loft above my stable that keeps warm enough. You may use it for the night.
Interior stable night. Skara makes a bed of straw atop the wooden planks of the loft. She moves as if she's putting off the inevitable. It's dark in here, lit almost entirely by a candle and a simple iron holder, with a trace more of light spilling from the doorway that leads to the hall. Valdala's mule lies on the hay below the loft. She covers her bed with an old textile, not too ragged to suggest its function, then lies down and pulls a sheepskin over her body. She blows out the candle and rolls onto her back, stares at the ceiling, in a bed by herself for the first time since she can remember. Tears well, she lets them, doesn't even try to blink them away. She throws off the sheepskin, rolls it, and bunches it together until it's about the size of a small body. She turns onto her side and hugs it tight. Interior stable day. Skara wakes to the sound of splitting wood somewhere outside the walls. Faint morning light streams through the cracks in the door. Skara sits up, rubs the dried tears from her eyes. She spots the rolled-up sheepskin, winces as she's flooded with the loss of her sister. Crack, another split. She looks off in the direction of the sound. Curiosity gets the better of her. She climbs down from the loft, hits the hay-strewn floor by the still sleeping mule. She goes to the door, opens it, peeks her head outside. It's barely dawn, but Valdala stands not far off, her back to the house and an axe held high over her head. The short sleeves of her tunic reveal arms shaped by decades of fending for herself. She brings the axe down. Crack. Her silver locks arc through the air as she splits a log in twain. She tosses the wood on a pile, grabs another log, and sets it on a stump. She wears the face of someone who is exactly where she wants to be, doing exactly what it is she wants to do. Skara squints, a look of determination on her face. Crack. Skara closes the door. Interior hall day. Skara stands near the hearth, pulls her now dried tunic over her head. The cracks echo softly in the background. She has a look around the hall. It's 20 feet long and perhaps 15 wide, with its shutters pulled open to let in the plush morning light. At one end lies the open door to the stable. At the other are two doorways, one of them open and the other guarded by a heavy wooden door that seems older than the house itself. The hearth sits at the exact center. Its smoke rises to the ceiling, then spreads out along it, patiently awaiting escape through the thatch. There's a sleeping platform, a table for one by a window. Tools and linens hang from the walls with pegs and hooks for many more. It seems, however, that most lie atop the many makeshift shelves and counters. It is cluttered in here, more than Scara realized. Dust and cobwebs abound. She takes a breath and starts toward the open doorway opposite the stable. Interior workroom day. Shelves lined with candles and candle-making supplies. Scara regards them with interest, but she makes for a wall that holds shovels, a pick, and a broom. Interior hall day. Scara sweeps the broom across the floor. A pile grows quickly. Cut 2. She uses the broom to knock down cobwebs that hang from the ceiling beams. Cut 2. Organizes items on shelves. Cut 2. Hangs tools on walls. Cut 2. Loads her arms with a couple pots and vessels, makes her way toward the door at the end. There's something dark about it, foreboding, even in the quiet morning light. She reaches for its ancient knob, startles at a low guttural squawk to her side. Allsvarder flies in through a window, heads straight for her. She ducks, but her hand is already in motion. It grips the knob and... Scara screams. Her scream cuts off. Her eyes go blank. She crumples to the ground and the pots clatter across the floor. Allsvarder turns around in midair, flies back out the window, squawking. We hold on Scara, who lies frozen in time, her face suggestive of death. A moment later, Valdala barges in from outside. She scans the room, sees Scara's body, fixes her eyes on something invisible nearby, nods to whatever it is she sees.
Fear not, lass, I will bring thee back.
She turns and walks to Scara.
If I do not like what he has to say, I will simply cut out thy tongue. Pray I do not also cut out thy heart.
She reaches Scara, sees the pots nearby. She looks about the room and realization crosses her face.
Wast thou cleaning?
She glances back toward the invisible object in the air.
I thank thee, lass, but I am quite at home in my mess.
She takes the pots, sets them on a nearby counter. She turns to the dark door, grips its knob with her good hand, which bears an obsidian ring. She opens the door as if it's nothing special at all, reveals a small room of shelves, chests, jars, and leather-bound tomes. She goes inside, reaches to an upper shelf, pulls down an old map case, covered in dust and rotted by time. She opens it, takes out a single scrolled-up leaf paper. She uncurls it, looks it over, then tucks it back into the case and sets it on the shelf. She exits the room, shuts the door behind her, takes a knife from the scabbard at her hip.
Foolish waste of blood this is.
She slices open her thumb, kneels by Scara, and wipes her blood across Scara's open lips. She places her hand over Scara's eyes, allows her essence to trickle down her face. She shuts her own eyes and breathes deep.
Kongik Peppa.
Scara reels back from Valdala. Scara gasps, draws in a huge breath of air. Her eyes stray wide as she gets her bearings. She brings her hands to her face, checks it's still there, sees the blood that is now on her fingertips.
Thou wast one with the ÄTHER. Aye, and anon ye are not.
Scara's breaths remain heavy. She glances at the doorknob.
Best not touch that door again, lass.
Scara backs away from it as Valdala passes her, heads to a counter, dips her hand in a basin of water.
Was I dead?
Did she feel dead?
I felt warm.
Aye.
Valdala flicks her hands dry, grabs a nearby scrap of cloth, and wraps her thumb in it.
Is that what it is like then? My sister, she is...
She is at peace, aye, as I have said, but it is not the same.
Thou brought me back.
It is not the same. Let us get ye fed and on the road, aye?
Valdala returns to the counter, picks up a kettle, and offers it to Scara.
Fetch some water from the spring.
Scara takes it, but her eyes linger on the dark door.
Mistress, I know not whither I would go.
There are a dozen villages within 2 or 3 days' walk, lass.
Word will spread of the girl who killed the priester.
If it spreads, it will be of a dead girl who was lost to the wood.
Be that as it may, my future is that of a servant. If I am to serve, I should like to do so here. I could cook and clean and...
Gramercy, lass, I has no need for it.
Aye, but thou wouldst have more time to practice thy arts, and perhaps, over time, thou might even teach me.
Teach thee? When? I wonder, betwixt chopping wood and sowing seed.
I could do those things, else.
Couldst ye now?
Exterior, the glade woodpile day. There's a thud, a soft one, as an axe connects with the edge of a log and buries itself a half-inch deep.
Wait.
Scara puts up her hand. She's sweating, panting. Been at this a while.
I will try again.
While Dala stands nearby, arms crossed.
Deuced.
Scara raises the axe overhead, breathes deep, brings it down with a scream. Thud. She's no closer to splitting it than she was before.
Hand it to me.
While Dala takes the axe from Scara and steps into place, she swings it overhead with grace and force and crack. The log explodes into two. Scara shakes her head.
This is thy fuel, Kingy.
It is years of fending for myselven. There is nae men's or women's work in my glade. There is only my work.
Scara, exhausted but not beaten, reaches for the axe.
Then let it be my work.
Not what Vazala expected, she studies her a moment, hands her the axe.
Split the pile and stack it, and ye may stay another night.
Scara takes it, grateful.
Gramercy, mistress.
She turns, regards the pile of logs before her, 100 of them at least. Interior hall night. Scara washes her bloodied hands in a basin, then does the same with the sweat and grime on her face. She's exhausted, hasn't been finished long, but she carries the satisfaction of a job well done.
Fetch the stool to the table.
Valdala passes her on the way to the dark door, a burning candle in hand. She grips the doorknob with the same hand as before, the one that bears the ring. She turns as she enters the room, sees Scara watching her.
Go on, then.
Aye, mistress.
Scara flicks the water from her hands, pats them dry on her tunic, and picks up a nearby stool. She carries it across the hall, sets it at the table by the window. Valdala exits the room, a book clutched to her chest. She closes the door behind her.
Sit.
Scara nods, does as she's told. Valdala joins her at the table, sets the book and candle atop it. She looks Scara in the eye, her expression grave, highlighted by the flame before her.
Ye wish to learn the old ways.
Aye.
Bow thy head and take my hands.
Valdala shuts her eyes, extends her hands across the table. Scara hesitates, her own palms raw and blistered. Valdala glances up.
Trust that I had touched far worse.
She closes her eyes again, gestures once more for Scara to clasp her hands. Scara takes them. She casts an involuntary glance at Valdala's missing fingers, then shifts her gaze to her face, beautiful and solemn. Scara bows her head, shuts her eyes. Valdala takes a deep breath. She exhales it slowly, then speaks.
We invoke thee, great Norns of old, and thy darkness within. Ye who cloak our hearts in fear, ye who spin fates and destroy them.
There are no overt changes, but the room feels charged, heavier somehow. Scara feels it and cracks her eyes open, looks as if she might pull back her hands, while Dala tightens her grip, never losing cadence.
Queens of disorder, our nightmare and inspiration, we hail ye. We hail ye and pray thee to open our third eye. Let our spirits mingle in the chaos of the ÄTHER. Give to Scara that which only ye can give. We invoke thee, great nuns of old.
While Dala holds for a reverent moment, then opens her eyes and releases Scara's hands.
There is an ill humor about thee.
Nay, mistress, forgive my seeming so.
Do you feel it, the ÄTHER?
Skara hesitates, then nods.
The Pope would have thee think of darkness as evil, of chaos as sin. To the weavers, the Norns of old, dark and light are but the same. Life, death, curses and good fortune. A healthy newborn or a dying warrior with a sword. All of these are spun from the same loom.
Valdala opens her book. Skara remains unsettled, but her attention is rapt.
The ÄTHER is everywhere. It is betwixt everything and behind it. It is a vast lake of power, and our world is but a dam that holds it back. Fjolkengi is the tool that unleashes it.
She pages through her book with care, each leaf filled with an intricate magic circle.
The circles and the runes that join them, they are the map that tells our mind where to look. The words we speak focus it. Stray from the smallest detail, and the spell may fail, or its effect may be altered with consequences more dire than ye hast already seen. I will take thee as my apprentice, young Skara. Ye will serve me for 3 winters, and in that time I will teach thee what I know. Ye wilt work and train to exhaustion, and I will work ye then harder. Thou wilt suffer, and I will not be kind in failure. Is all of this agreed?
Aye.
Then let us say it in blood.
She pulls her knife from its sheath, lays it on the table. Doubt now cleared Skara's face, but Valdala focuses on the candle before them.
Lekia Skildari.
The flame flickers and fades to blue. Skara's doubt transforms to fear. Valdala picks up the knife, pricks her thumb where she'd sliced it open before.
I wilt be thy mistress for 3 winters, young Skara, and in that time I will teach thee all I can.
She holds her thumb over the candle and squeezes a few drops of blood from it. They hit the flame and it turns violet.
There is a sacred bond. This is a sacred bond. Should I break it, the weavers would demand that ye kill me. My duty to thee shall be the same.
Valdala places the knife in front of Skara.
Dost.
Skara stares at the knife, feels the weight of the act before her.
I will teach thee in no other way.
Skara picks up the knife, brings the blade to her thumb tip.
I will be thy servant and thy pupil. I will obey thy every command for 3 winters. I will commit myself to the old ways.
She looks at Valdala, who nods. Skara slices open her thumb, holds it above the candle, lets her blood drizzle over the flame. It turns black and casts the room in ghostly light. It flickers, sparks, and sputters, and the black fire fades back to yellow.
So it is done.
She nods at Skara and her stern demeanor fades. They have bonded in the truest sense she knows. She lets that hang in the air a moment.
It is also late.
Valdala goes to close the heavy tome, then pauses.
Wouldst thee like to see thy first spell afore we retire?
Aye, mistress.
Valdala's eyes brighten. Magic excites her as much as it did decades ago. She pages through the book to another intricate circle.
Remember that every spell is but a path to what is already there. It may be different for ye than for I.
She takes a deep, hypnotic breath and focuses on the candle.
Norton Vedre.
A small puff of wind blows out the flame, shrouding the table in near darkness. The puff was so slight that her words, ending in an H no less, almost seem as if they could have been the source. Skara looks at the candle, then to Valdala. This is not what she was expecting.
What vexes thee?
Not, mistress.
Ye expected something more grand?
Nay.
Or flourish?
Nay, mistress.
Not mistress, nay, mistress. Light the candle, lass. Let us see thy craft at work.
I pray thee, I meant no offense.
Thou hast just sworn to obey my every command. Light it.
Skara takes the candle from the table, her eyes cast down, her shoulders drawn in. She stands, walks to the hearth and lights it, then returns and sets it on the table.
Dost.
I pray thee, forgive my trespass.
Cast this spell. Surely the circle is seared to thy mind.
Mistress,
The words to thy tongue. Speak them, great Skara, anon.
Skara takes a breath, tries to focus on the flame.
Nord,
Nord. Nord? Where is thy confidence?
Nordan,
Nordon. Nordon. That is the word thy fumbling mouth fails to speak. And yet ye dare to question my teaching? Thou lookst down thy handsome nose as if it is not worthy of thee. And on the first night, no less, I hast made a blood pact with an imp.
alas, mistress,
I will say the words for thee but one more time, and thou wilt not forget them. Ye will say them day and night over and over again until thy very throat bleeds. The words thy hollow skull seems unwilling to retain are Nordon Vedre.
Skara jumps at the roar of wind outside the longhouse. There's a cacophony of snapping limbs and rattling shutters. Despite her fear, Skara can't help herself. She is awed. It builds to a howling crescendo and ends with a crash and a clatter somewhere beyond the walls. The wind dies just as quickly as it came. Skara's face falls as she realizes what must have happened.
That would be the woodpile.
Alsvarder squawks from his perch overhead as if gleeful in Skara's misfortune.
no.
Get to thy bed, little imp. I will show ye to thy duties to morn, after ye stack the wood.
Interior, stable, loft, night. Skara lies beside the bundled up sheepskin. She clutches it, stares into the darkness. She looks as if she might be questioning her decision, but then...
Nordon Vedri. Nordon Vedri.
Exterior, the glade woodpile, night. Clop. Skara stacks 2 split logs on a tall woodpile.
Nordon Vedri.
It's black outside, and a cool mist covers the glade. It's impossible to tell the time, but Skara's nearly finished. Clop.
Nordon Vedri.
Clop.
Nordon Vedri.
Clop.
Nordon Vedri.
That was the last of them. Skara wipes the sweat from her brow, glances up at the treetops across the glade. The first light of dawn is just now breaking. She makes her way back to the house. Squawk. She glances up. Alsvarder watches from a limb overhead. Skara looks ahead and keeps walking. Interior hall, moments later. Skara pushes through the main door, sees Valdela by the hearth, stirring a kettle of pottage above the fire.
Good morning, mistress.
Valdela nods, without looking up. Skara shuts the door behind her.
The wood is stacked.
Aye, little imp, and I also heard ye speak the words I gave thee.
Aye, I'll be that. I asked a ways to go before my throat bleeds.
Ye have some spirit in ye, lass.
Valdela taps off her ladle on the kettle and looks up.
Eat, and then we will see if we can break it.
Exterior, the garden day. Skara pulls a weed from a row just of sprouting crops, drops it into a large basket held in her other arm.
Nordon Vedri.
Vedre.
Valdela stands nearby and watches. It's still early morning and they are at the edge of the 2-acre field, all of it covered in weeds. The long house in the glade can be seen through the trees, just uphill.
Vedre.
Good. Do not stop repeating. Do not stop repeating it. Alsvarder will be here to remind thee.
A squawk from above, where Alsvarder soars overhead. Skara pulls another weed.
Nordon Vedri.
And another.
Nordon Vedri.
She glances back for approval, but Valdela is already a ways up the path toward the longhouse. She lifts her eyes to Alsvarder, then returns to her work. She plucks another weed from the ground.
Nordon vedre.
Exterior the glade pool day. Midday. Skara beats a soaked tunic with a washing bat. She's sunburnt and tired, but going strong. She dips it back into the pool, wrings it out. Stonework has been laid for this purpose, a surface to sit and scrub on, as well as the dam that pools the water. She has ceased in her chant and seems glad to just work, but her pace is not slowed. She sets the bat aside and stands, turns to hang the tunic from a clothesline nearby. Squawk. Alsvarder startles her from where he sits on a post.
Kirsty Raven! Hast thou not a toad to eat?
Alsvarder squawks again and chatters at her, hunching his wings and bobbing his head, menacing.
Nordon vedre! Nordon vedre!
Her voice cracks as she shouts in his face. He stays put, unfazed by the outburst. Skara pauses, sees something through the trees at the edge of the glade. A large boulder, 5 feet in height or more, rolled up against the cliff face as if by purpose. Flowering bushes hug its sides. Squawk. Skara snaps out of it. Throws the meanest glare she can at the huge black bird and returns to her work.
Nordon vedre. Nordon.
Exterior the glade, forest edge day.
Vedre.
Skara, more sunburnt, more tired, throws a shovel full of mule shit on a pile. She digs the shovel into a rickety wooden wheelbarrow that's full of the stuff, lifts and throws again.
Nordon vedre.
She digs again, stops. A gleam of light catches her eye on the ground. That's the same line of obsidian stone. She wonders at it. Squawk. She throws the shovel of muck at Alsvarder, sends him angrily into the air from his perch. Exterior the glade sand hut day. Skara pushes the empty wheelbarrow across the grass, her voice reduced to a whisper.
Nordon vedre. Nordon vedre.
She wheels it past the gazebo-like structure near the center of the glade. Open-walled and thatch-roofed, its floor is made of deep, coal-black sand, boxed in by wood worn smooth from use and time. Valdala kneels at its edge and drags the tip of a polished blackthorn stick, a wand, through the sand. An open book lies beside her.
Little imp,
Skara pauses.
it has been an age since I have spent most of a day in study. Gramercy.
We see now that she has been drawing, an exact copy of the intricate circle on the open page of her book. Skara bows her head and speaks, her voice warm.
I am glad, mistress.
Valdala takes a small wooden rake and drags it across the sand, erasing her circle.
I told thee that the circles are a map of the mind. They must be fixed in it, lest ye be forever beholden to casting spells with a book.
She turns her book to the page from the night before, then stands and offers Skara the wand.
Ye will spend many an hour here in practice, until ye can draw every detail from memory.
Skara stares at the wand, hesitant.
It is just a stick. Take it and draw.
Skara takes it and kneels at the edge of the hut. She studies the book, then dips the wand into the sand and copies the circle, her movements slow and reverent. Valdala nods.
When ye has drawn it 50 times, ye may come inside to sup.
Valdala turns and heads for the house. Skara watches her, then returns her attention to the sand. Interior hall night. Valdala runs an ink-tipped quill across a leaf of paper, adding a rune to the dozen that are already scrawled there.
This is lore, le, oft used for spells of water and peace.
Skara sits at the table across from her, fully engaged. Valdala draws another rune.
Air, ar, and then z. Endurance and strength.
That is the one on the axe blade.
Aye,
It is confusing that some have more than one sound.
that is the beauty of it. There are many paths to a spell. The Norn finds the one best suited to her.
Then why the Nordon and vedre?
Because, little imp, I know those paths will work.
While Dala stands, slides the paper across the table.
Study it, same as the circles.
She turns and heads toward the open door at the end, disappearing into the workroom. Scara takes the leaf of paper, looks it over, careful not to smudge the ink. She mouths different sounds with her lips, while Dala reappears, a corked jug in one hand, an empty goblet in the other.
I expect he has never had mead afore?
Interior hall moments later. A golden stream of mead pours from the jug into the goblet. Valdala sets the jug beside the candle. The book sits there too, open to the page she's been studying.
This was the fine batch.
She sets the cup before Scara, who reaches for it.
Not yet.
Scara pulls her hand back.
Words and circles are not enough. Fjolkengi requires a higher mind, achieved through both pleasure and pain. Drink.
Scara takes the goblet, does as she's told. She smiles as the sweet liquid tickles and warms her.
It is very fine.
Aye,
She nods at the candle.
blow it out.
Scara sets the cup down, caught off guard. She looks at the candle, then back at her mistress. Valdala gestures for her to go on with it.
Whilst the mead is still fresh on thy tongue, unless thou wouldst prefer to try pain.
Scara turns to the book, follows the circle's intricacies with her eyes, then shifts them back to the candle.
Touch the ÄTHER.
Scara takes a breath, closes her eyes.
Nordon vedre.
She looks. The candle flame flickers just a touch, but remains lit. Undeterred, Scara shuts her eyes again.
Nordon,
Nay,
mistress?
something is amiss. It might be thy words need to be altered. More likely, thy mind must go higher.
Valdala gives her a look that is at once knowing and unsettling. As Scara opens her mouth to question it, a bee flies in through the window and stings her lip. She bolts out of her seat, swats at it again. She winces at the pain, brings her hand to the spot.
Krista!
Make haste, whilst the pain persists and thy lips are not swole.
I am stung!
Cast thy spell!
Scara breathes, tries to settle herself. She sits, returns her attention to the candle, focuses.
Nordon vedre!
The flame flickers noticeably more than last time. Looks for a moment as if it might go out. It doesn't.
Krista!
She holds her lip, the pain from the sting still present, the pain of failure far worse.
There is still a third way.
What?
Valdala leans forward, stares at her. Scara's eyes waver, lose their focus. Her fingers tremble, her head nods.
Something is wrong?
Aye, it is the mandrake.
Mandrake?
Scara looks to the goblet before her, the jug of mead, the mead that Valdala never touched. Valdala's gaze remains fixed. She wants this for Scara.
Return to the candle. Call upon the circle. Speak the words.
Scara vomits. Her eyes roll into the back of her head. She slumps over, falls off the stool, hits the floor unconscious. Interior hall later. Scara's point of view. Unnatural light, warped visuals, reverberating sounds. We're on the floor by the hearth, and we are tripping hard. Valdala lays a sheepskin over us. Her face is a caring beacon of calm, with flickers of a snarl behind it.
Rest.
Our eyes close. Interior hall night. Quiet, with deep shadows and faint orange from the fire's dying embers. Scara lies unconscious beside the hearth and beneath the sheepskin blanket. Sweat beads on her forehead, but she seems to be through the worst of it. Valdala lies asleep on her platform in the corner. Alsvarder on a beam overhead. Scara rouses, slowly cracks open her eyes. They widen.
Lena?
Lena lies next to her, a longing smile on her face. She opens her mouth to speak, and blue fire erupts from it.
Lena!
Scara bursts out from beneath the blanket as Lena spews fire with a terrifying, unnatural shriek. Skara grabs the sheepskin, throws it over Lena as the flames burst from her throat, just as they did before.
No.
Alsvarder explodes from his perch in a squawking fury. Valdala awakes. Skara swats at the blanket over and over in a frantic attempt to beat out the flames, her face panicked, horrified, grief-stricken. The flames poke through the blanket and burn her palms. Her screams become pain. Valdala grips her shoulders from behind, yanks her away from the hearth to her feet.
What art thou doing?
Skara looks at the hearth. The sheepskin is not on the floor, but inside the hearth, aflame. Lena is nowhere to be seen. She was trying to put out the actual fire. She lets out a sob, throws her arms around Valdala, her scorched fingers curled like claws. She cries into her mistress's shoulder. Valdala is taken aback by the affection and vulnerability. She does her best with it, pats Skara on the back. She pulls away gently, goes to the door and opens it.
Go dip thy hands in the water. Make haste.
Exterior, the glade, pool, night. Skara plunges her hands below the surface. She kneels on the stones, lets the cool water soothe her. Her cries trail off into sniffles. The ripples still and her reflection stares back, her face cast in shadow by the moon that looms behind her. Even beyond that, there's a darkness that wasn't present before. A soft, high-pitched sound perks her ears from across the pool. A whistle, maybe, or a screech, or perhaps just the wind. Whatever it is now has the best of her curiosity. She stands, lets the water drip from her hands as she walks barefoot across the dam toward the wood. She reaches the obsidian stones. The sound is still faint, but it is stronger now and drawing her in. She crosses the threshold and heads into the forest. She follows the sound back toward the cliff, toward the stone that lies pressed up against it. The screeches are muffled, but they are now unmistakable. They sound human and agonizing.
Skara.
Skara whips around, snapped from her trance. Valdala moves toward her with purpose.
Back to the house. Anon.
Skara looks back to the boulder.
Didst ye not hear that? The screams!
The mandrakes still have hold of thee, Skara. Back to the house. Ye need a rest.
Mistress.
That is a command.
Skara hesitates but says nothing. She casts one last glance at the boulder, then heads back toward the house. Interior hall of night. Valdala steps through the door, closes it behind her, sees Skara as she makes her way to the stable.
Skara.
Skara pauses but doesn't turn.
Let me see thy hands.
Cut to, Valdala's disfigured hand dips into a small clay jar of salve. She sits next to Skara on the bench by the fire, holding one of Skara's hands in her other, which bears the obsidian ring. Skara remains tensed, reserved, but shuts her eyes and exhales in relief as Valdala rubs the salve on her fingers. They have the shine of fresh burns and a couple blisters, but the damage is mostly superficial.
He has the ways to go, for he has the hands of a true witch, little imp. But this will help with the sting.
I feel a fool.
Nay, the mandrake is powerful, and this was thy first time.
She works the salve into Skara's palm. The firelight glints off her ring.
Thy ring. It is the same as the stones around the glade.
Obsidian, born from the heart of the earth. ÆTHER, one can touch.
Skara looks at it with new appreciation.
When I crossed into the forest,
I could feel it, aye.
the boulder back there, it was the tomb.
Valdala's face loses its warmth. She averts her eyes, goes to the jar for more salve.
Thy husband?
Valdala takes Skara's other hand and rubs in the salve.
I was never wed. That is just the story I tell to sell me candles. But there was the time I had a child. She too sought the old ways. She did not respect their power.
Alas, mistress, I grieve for thee.
Valdala nods, lets go of Skara's hand, and stands.
Get some rest. It will be back to work in the morn.
She picks up the jar and carries it to the dark door at the end of the hall. Skara watches as she opens it with her obsidian ringed hand.
Hey everyone, we're going to take like a 5-minute intermission. So grab a drink, go make some popcorn. If you want to check out the cast and follow them on social media, all their info is in the description below the video. And we will be back shortly.
Interior stable loft day. Squawk. Alsvarder stares us. Skara bolts awake, lying inches away from the raven. She glares, swats at him. He jumps just out of reach and squawks again.
Hi, Alsvarder. I am up.
Interior hall day. Skara follows Alsvarder into the hall, watches as he flies out an open window. She reaches for her tunic where it hangs from the line, pauses as something catches her eye on the table. Valdalla's clothes lie folded there, along with her ring. Skara approaches the table. She leans over it, peers out the window. Point of view, looking outside. Valdalla bathes herself in the pool. Back to scene. Skara turns her attention to the ring. She picks it up, cautiously at first, but she can't help herself. She slips it onto her finger. She admires it, the way it gleams in the morning light. She looks at the dark door, stays on it. Cut to, Skara's hand bearing the obsidian ring grips the knob of the dark door and turns it. She opens the door and steps inside, a candle held before her to light the way. Interior, forbidden room, continuous. Skara looks over the shelves, chests and books, exhilaration overriding fear. She lifts the lid off a jar, turns away and sets it back, revulsed. She holds the candle for a look at the shelf above her, sees the map case tucked along the odds and ends. She casts a nervous glance out the door and then reaches for it, takes it down. Imprinted on the end cap are 2 large runes. She regards them a moment, sets the candle down, opens the case, pulls out the scrolled up leaf of paper, uncurls it. It contains a circle unlike any she's seen before, its lines and angles sharper, harder. The runes from the case repeat several times over, along with a few others. All of it is scrawled in dark red ink. Blood? Skara suddenly gets the feeling she's worn out her welcome. With the scroll still in her hand, she closes the empty case and sets it back on the shelf. She takes one last look around the room, then picks up her candle and leaves. Interior stable loft day. Skara climbs into her loft, still holding the scroll. As she reaches the top, she hears the sound of the door latch in the hall. She scrambles to the far edge of the loft, hides the scroll beneath some hay near the wall. She quickly turns around, climbs back down the ladder. Interior hall day. Skara steps inside from the stable. Valdalla stands by the table, nude, looking for something. Skara realizes the ring's still on her finger. She hides her hands behind her back, removes it and cups it in her right.
Good morning, mistress.
Valdalla turns to her, unabashed and unashamed in her nakedness, and somehow more intimidating for it.
Skara, how fare thy hands?
As new.
Skara smiles, raises her left hand for show. Valdalla smiles back. Her eyes flick to Skara's right, which hangs conspicuously at her side. She looks back to Skara, never losing her smile.
Good. There is plenty to be done.
She turns back to the table, lifts her clothes and looks beneath them, then scans the floor nearby.
Is something amiss?
My ring. I had left it on the table.
Skara pretends to scan the floor, walks a few steps. She bends down, mimes picking something up.
Here it is, mistress.
Valdalla turns as Skara stands and holds up the ring.
Gramercy.
She looks Skara in the eye as she approaches.
So strange what can happen when one takes one's eyes off of things.
She holds out her hand for the ring. Exterior the glade woodpile day. Crack. Skara drives the axe halfway through a log. She nods, pleased. Not a clean split, but a solid strike nonetheless. She's making progress. She raises the axe again, the log clinging to the blade, and drives it back down toward the stump. Exterior paddock day. Skara digs a shovel beneath a pile of mule shit. She picks it up, walks to the wheelbarrow nearby, and tosses the load at it. Interior hall day. Skara drops chopped potatoes into a kettle on the counter. She picks up a knife, another potato, and goes to work on it. The paper with the runes is propped against the wall nearby. She reads from it.
Wraith?
Valdalla sits at the table across the hall, poring over a circle in one of her books.
Aye, means speed or journey.
Skara nods, taking it in. She looks at the paper again, at one of the runes she's seen on the map case.
Remind me what the next one means.
That is Kaun. It gives ke or ge sound. Means disease or death.
Skara nods, eyes the other rune from the case, farther down the page.
And Bjarkin means life, eh?
At this, Valdala glances up from her work.
Why art thou jumping ahead?
Alas, mistress, I was...
Start over.
Interior stable loft night. Skara sits hunched over a candle in her stolen scroll, pinned flat by rocks at its corners. She traces its lines and its angles with her fingertip.
Gakin Pokja? Kugok Babina? Kungi Bapa.
The candle flickers red for a brief instant. Skara stares at it. A chill runs down her spine. Goosebumps dot her arms. She rolls up the scroll, tucks it back in hiding. Turns to the candle and blows it out. Exterior the glade, Biskeps day. Smoke pours from a smoldering clay pot. A faint buzzing drone fills the air. Skara sets the pot on a platform at the base of a cone-shaped skep right beneath its coin-sized hole. She backs away as quickly as she's able.
Blow the smoke into the hole.
Valdala stands nearby, watching. Skara turns to her, incredulous.
They will not sting ye without my say.
I have been stung here before.
Aye.
Skara's lips part as that registers. She turns to the skep, swallows her fear. She approaches the smoldering pot, kneels before it, and blows the smoke into the hole. The faint drone builds until it sounds less like something natural and more like a mechanical nightmare.
Keep going.
Skara blows the smoke toward the hole once more, and bees burst forth from it like a geyser, a steady, terrifying stream with no space between them. Skara leaps back as they swirl around her and land on her arms, covering them completely. She looks down at her sleeves of angry, crawling insects.
Mistress!
It is not me. Something about thee makes them nervous.
Valdala's eyes narrow.
Krister!
What makes them nervous, Skara?
Skara sees a suspicion in her eyes. She glances at the bees, then back to Valdala, steels herself.
I know not, mistress. Bid them leave, I pray thee.
Valdala studies her a moment, then waves her hand. The bees explode into flight. Interior workroom day. Honey oozes from a wooden press, drizzles into the vessel beneath it. Skara grits her teeth as she twists the crank with everything she has. Interior hall day. Skara stands over the kettle, stirs melted beeswax with a long wooden spoon. Exterior sand hut day. Skara draws a circle in the sand with her wand. Interior hall night. Skara stares at a candle that burns on the table before her.
Nordon vedre.
A flicker, but nothing more. Skara glits. She picks up a goblet, brings it to her lips.
Stop.
Skara pauses, looks up as Valdala approaches.
That is enough mead. Ye must learn also to embrace pain.
She sets a thin iron needle on the table. Interior hall moments later. The needle plunges beneath Skara's fingernail. She sucks in a breath of air, her eyes water. She can't help it. She whimpers. Valdala sits across from her, nods.
Dosed.
Nordon vedre.
A rush of air passes over the table. The candle goes out, nearly topples over. Valdala's hair flutters in the wind.
It worked. It worked.
Valdala nods, her eyes gleam with pride.
Brenna brekta.
A trundle of flame leaps from the hearth to the candle, lights it anew. Skara is awed. She's not seen this spell before.
Again, without the book.
Skara nods. She closes the book before her, shuts her eyes, touches the needle protruding from her finger, embraces the pain, and looks to the candle.
Nordon vedre.
Nothing but the tiniest flicker. Valdala nods, stands.
More practice.
She walks away from the table. Exterior field day. Chop, chop, chop. A hoe cuts into the topsoil. Skara works it with some skill. Her hair has grown, as have the crops that stretch in rows across the field. Exterior, the glade, woodpile day. Crack. Scara splits a log clean in two with her axe. She tosses the pieces onto a pile, takes another log, splits it without hesitation. Exterior, the glade, pool day. Scara beats at a tunic with a washing bat. Alsvarder perches on the clothesline post nearby. He stares at something on the ground near Scara, bobs his head, and hunches his wings. Scara sees this and follows his gaze, spots a frog enjoying the sun at the edge of the pool. She thumps the ground next to the frog with her washing bat.
Go on.
The frog takes the hint and dives underwater, out of sight. Squawk. Alsvarder looks at her with what can only be a glare. He flaps his wings and takes off into the sky as Scara continues her work. She glances up, a smirk on her lips. The frustrated bird circles the glade overhead. Exterior, the glade, sand hut day. Scara draws the last details of the Northern Vidry circle with her wand. She stops, looks over the lines in the sand. She turns to the closed book behind her, opens it, looks at the circle on the page, then back to the sand again. She smiles, proud of herself. She takes the rake, erases the circle. She casts a glance over her shoulder. Sees only the house and the glade behind her. Waldela is nowhere in sight. She returns to the book, closes it, lifts it up, and reveals the scroll that she stole beneath it. She takes the paper and sets it on the sand before her, out of sight from the house. She picks up the wand, copies the first lines of the circle. Alsvarder lands beside her with a whoosh. She jumps back, startled. He grabs the scroll in his beak, flies back into the air. She lunges for him.
Nay!
And misses. Her eyes widen in horror as he flies straight for the house.
Krister!
Scara leaps up, sprints after him. Even as he flies through a window, she runs. She reaches the house, yanks open the door.
Mistress?
Interior hall continuous. Waldala sits at the table, the scroll already in her hands, and Alsvarder perched on her shoulder. She lifts her eyes to Scara, expressionless.
So, thou wishes to raise the dead.
Exterior forest day. Waldala marches through the undergrowth not far from the glade. She looks over her shoulder.
Keep up.
Scara follows behind, dreading whatever might be coming. Exterior cliffside tomb day. They reach the boulder at the base of the cliff and Waldala stops. She takes a deep breath, concentrates.
Resas midilla.
The stone grinds and rumbles and rolls out of the way, and agonizing screams pour from the tunnel behind it. Scara takes an involuntary step back. It's too dark to see what's inside.
What is that?
Go and see.
Scara shakes her head, terrified as the screams continue.
Nay, mistress.
Waldala seizes Scara's arm and pulls her toward the tunnel. Pushes her.
Anon.
Scara looks one last time at Waldala. The witch is not about to give. Scara takes a step forward, swallows, takes another. The screaming persists. Pain and horrible. Unintelligible syllables, unable to form words. Scara pauses at the threshold, looks back again.
I pray thee.
Waldala moves toward her, puts a hand on her back, pushes her inside and follows with her. Interior tomb continuous. It's cramped in here, about as tall as a person and not much wider. Waldala raises her voice above the screaming.
Ye ignore my warnings, ye disobey, ye steal from me. Thou wilt see what it is to fight the weavers.
20 feet inside, there's a stone wall that has been built up ahead of them, with only a small eye-level window giving way to the other side. Waldala rushes her forth. The screams are deafening now. Some almost sound like mama, if one had no ability to form an M. Feet from the wall, Waldala shouts above the cries.
Look!
Scara's eyes well with tears. Her hands shake and her knees quiver. She shakes her head. She can't do it. Waldala grabs her by the hair, drags her to the window.
Look!
Scara looks. Beyond the window, just visible in the darkness, is the gruesome face of a girl, shrieking in anguish. Her lips, nose, and eyelids have been burned away, leaving behind gnashing teeth and wide, relentless eyes. Scara's hand flies to her face. She looks as if she might vomit. Instead, she turns and runs for the end of the tunnel, pushing past Waldala.
I cannot.
Waldala lets her go, doesn't even look as Scara dashes out into the daylight. She keeps her eyes on the window on the screaming girl behind it. Grief spills over her face. Interior hall day. Skara cinches a rope with a sheepskin. Her hands still shake, but she manages to tie it off. She stands, throws the bundle over her shoulder. The door opens. Valdala steps inside. She's been crying, but the tears are gone now.
Mistress?
Valdala takes in the scene, glares.
Miss Grow was not enough. Ye would steal provisions from me.
Alas, mistress.
We had a bond.
Release me. I pray thee.
Release ye.
She shuts the door behind her, blocking Skara's exit.
I do not want this life.
It was ye who defied me. Ye who didn't hear me warnings.
Thy own daughter lives sealed in a cave with her agony.
Aye, that is the price of defying the weavers. I sought for months a spell to bring her back. When she rose, she was just as she was when she died.
Then end her misery.
You think I had not tried? That spell hath not yet been granted me. I could not let ye do the same to thy sister. Aye, that is what you wanted all along.
She was the only person I ever had.
Ye hadst me.
I beg thee, let me go.
Where will ye go? Who wouldst have ye?
There is one who might.
And if not?
Then I am lost either way.
Valdala is grieved by Skara's resolve, but there's no undoing it. She nods, opens the door, steps out of her way.
We will pray that in our agreement, the weavers will be lenient.
Gramercy, mistress.
Skara goes to give her a hug, but Valdala puts a hand out, holds her back.
If you return to me glade, Skara, I will have no choice but to kill you.
Skara looks her in the eye, sees she's deadly serious. She nods, turns, and heads outside. Exterior, the glade continuous. Skara leaves the house as the door closes behind her. She makes for the path at the edge of the woods. Exterior road day. Skara steps out of the woods and onto the road. Having followed the stream down the mountain, she checks both directions. There's no one in sight. She looks to her right, to where the stream crosses the road ahead. The gushing waters of spring have given way to the trickle of summer. She starts back toward Litlakoppinger. Exterior, forest, outside, Litlakoppinger, evening. Point of view. From just inside the edge of the forest, we watch as the gates of Litlakoppinger close for the night. Exterior, Litlakoppinger, outside the palisade, night. Skara drags a forearm-wide tree from the forest into the open and toward the palisade. Two more already lean against it, forming a kind of bridge to the top. Exterior, Litlakoppinger, on the palisade, night. Skara climbs over the wall, drops to the dirt that ramps up to into the inside. She glances about, sees nothing more than a village that has settled for the night. Under the cover of darkness, she heads toward one of the farmsteads. Exterior, hay barn, night. Skara sneaks up to the door of a large shed, not far from a longhouse. Silently as possible, she opens the door, steps through, shuts herself inside. Exterior, chicken coop day. A rooster crows from its perch atop the coop. The day is young, with the sun still tucked behind the mountains. Interior, hay barn, continuous. Skara sits on a bed of hay in the corner of the barn, huddled beneath the sheepskin. She's awake, has been for a while. She wears only her shift. Her bare feet poke out from under the blanket. She peers through the gaps in the clapboards, keeps her eye on the chicken coop. Her ears perk at the sound of a door opening somewhere beyond it. Intercut with Skara's point of view. A moment later, Eigen comes into view, sleepy-eyed and carrying a basket. He goes to the coop, opens a hatch, reaches inside for the morning's eggs. Eigen pauses, unsure if he's heard something.
Eigen.
This time, he turns around and looks for the source.
In the barn.
He takes a step toward the barn, puzzled.
What?
Shh. Just come inside.
Curiosity gets the best of him. He heads toward it. Skara stands, brushes the hay off her tunic, runs her fingers through her hair. The door opens and Eigen steps inside. His face gives way to fear.
Skara!
He tenses, takes a step back out the door.
Wait,
Skara grabs his arm.
I pray thee, let me explain.
He says nothing, but lets Skara pull him back inside. She shuts the door behind him.
Whatever thou hast heard of me, it is untrue.
Abi Horger.
I was defending myself.
He said thou.
Said, he is alive.
He said thou used witchcraft to murder thy sister, and tried to murder him.
He is a liar.
He is a priester.
He restrains himself, lowers his voice again.
Why art thou here?
I came here for thee, Eigen.
I do not understand.
Skara looks into his eyes, move closer.
Thou fancies me. I know this.
He tries to form words, fails. She keeps going.
There is no life for either of us here. But we could wed and make a new home. A new life anywhere we choose.
She smiles, moves even closer.
I could give thee babes of thy own.
Eigen is torn, both scared and aroused. She puts her hand on his arm again, gently, seductively.
Take what wealth thou can and leave with me. Escape this place with me as thy bride.
Eigen considers, but then...
Nay.
He turns and takes a step toward the door. Skara tightens her grip on his arm, pulls him back to her, kisses him. She pulls her lips away, stares into his eyes with ferocious intensity. Eigen stares back, amazed. He gives in. He wraps his arms around her, pulls her back to him, and kisses her like a man who has prayed for this moment his entire life. Skara guides him to a loose stack of hay, pushes him down, kisses him all the while. She pulls his tunic up, climbs on top of him. He shudders as she guides him inside her. She rides him. Her lips part and her eyes close as she loses herself in her passion. The first sex in which she's had control, or autonomy, or choice. The ecstasy rushes through her body. She clutches his shoulders, digs in with her fingers, arches her back. Eigen moans, and he finishes. He looks at her in adoration.
Thou art beautiful.
But Skara's not done. She pins him back to the hay and slides up his body.
What is thou doing?
Use thy tongue.
She sits on his face and he does as he's commanded. Skara arches her back again, moans, breathes, does her best to keep it quiet as she builds towards climax. And then, almost as if by instinct,
Nordon Vedrida!
a blast of wind rushes forth from her. Hay explodes into the air, clearing a 2-meter circle around them and rattling the walls. Eigen pushes her off him and backs away. Skara sits back, watches as the straw flutters to the ground, her lips parted in wonder. Eigen's eyes are wide with fear.
Christer.
He shifts his gaze to the door.
Eigen, wait.
Eigen springs to his feet. Skara grabs at him as he passes, but he's too strong. He plows by, throws the door open, runs inside and screams.
Witch!
Exterior Littlekopinger continuous. High above the village as Eigen's words echo off the mountainsides. Cut to interior church night. The sanctuary, silent, empty, and dim. We move to its lone interior door, heavy, wooden, and locked, with a small barred window at eye level. It rattles. Interior church jail night. Cramped and dark, Skara stands at the center, her hair and shift flapping in the wind as she tries to will the door off its hinges. The gale stops and the door stills. Skara glares.
Nordon Vedrida!
The door shakes and rattles again, but remains fixed, strong as the day it was built. She gives up, sits on the cold stone floor, her back against the wall. She pulls her knees against her chest, rests her chin on them, rests her eyes a moment. They open again. The muffled sound of footsteps approaches her cell, and torchlight along with them. Eigen's face appears in the window. There's a hateful coolness about it, amplified by the orange glow.
Eigen. Art thou here for another go at me afore I am judged?
I am no longer under thy spell, witch.
Nordon Vedrida!
A gust of wind blows out Eigen's torch, plunging them into darkness. A moment passes in the black disquiet.
I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Is he, Eigen? Is thy God with thee?
If thou hadst the power to do me harm, thou wouldst have done it.
I do not wish to harm thee, Eigen.
My soul risks eternal damnation for thy witchcraft.
I cast no spell to make thou love me. Thou wast weak and broken. Just as I.
It's a bitter pill, but Eigen knows it's true.
Why art thou here, Eigen?
Poppy Horger hath demanded a penance, lest I burn in hell. I am to slay thy mistress.
I know not of whom you speak.
The chandler's widow, who gave thee the candle that killed Lena. I must know where she is.
Scara's eyes grow cold. She says nothing.
Thou didst not learn thy craft on thy own.
Silence. Scara focuses on the ground before her. Eigen holds up an iron key, taps it on a window bar.
My salvation for thy freedom, Skera.
Scara looks at it, remains quiet.
It is a fair trade.
She glances away again. Eigen pounds his fist against the door, gives up.
Then we shall burn together.
He turns, walks away. Scara looks up at the empty window. She shuts her eyes, shuts out the guilt from what she's about to do. She stands.
Eigen.
Eigen pauses, back.
An hour's walk down the highway. Thou will meet a stream. Cross it and follow it up the mountain until ye meet a path. It will take ye to her home.
Eigen breathes a sigh of relief, turns to her.
Gramercy.
Thou wilt need many men.
I forgive thee for thy sins against me, Skera, and I will pray for thy soul.
He heads for the door.
Eigen,
She rushes to the window, her face panicked.
we hast an agreement.
He pauses once more, casts a shameful glance at her,
Broken, just as thou.
and keeps walking. Scara slams her fists on the door.
Eigen!
His footsteps echo throughout the sanctuary, then they die. Exterior churchyard day. Morning light scattered by rivulets of mist amongst gravestones. 4 calloused hands grip the unaccompanied breaking wheel. They're joined by grunts as they hoist it off its pole. A torch sets fire to a pile of logs. An open iron kettle hangs from a tripod above them. Interior church jail day. Scara's door opens. She lies on the floor, curled up for warmth. She cracks her eyes open, squints at the sudden wash of light. Bjorn and Ulf stand outside. Bjorn with his sword drawn, Ulf with his axe.
Rise.
Exterior churchyard day. The men drag Scara from the church. She gives no protest or struggle, but they're rough with her just the same. Papi Horgor stands on the lawn out front, his back to her, his head bowed, and a young boy at his side. A crowd has gathered before them, mostly women and children. Scara looks for Eigen among the men, but aside from those at her arms, all of them are elderly. Bjorn and Ulf force her to her knees. She grunts. Papi Horgor glances back, his eyes delighted and contemptuous. The priest places a hand on the boy's shoulder, addresses the crowd with a gesture. We see the wound in his throat. It is healed, but not well. He makes the sign of the cross with his heavy wooden crucifix, then nods to the boy.
In the name of the Holy Trinity, we gather here for justice and deliverance from evil.
Papi Horgor speaks in a loud, raspy whisper. It's painful just hearing it.
Amen.
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 The priest turns to Scara and the boy with him. He squeezes the boy's shoulder.
Skera of Littlecapinger.
Thou stands before God.
Thou stands before God accused of witchery, the attempted murder of a priester, and adultery. Dost thou hast anything to say in thy defense?
Who hast accused me of adultery?
The boy looks to Papi Horgor, who nods that he may answer.
Eigen is thy accuser.
I do not see him.
He hath taken a band of men.
The priest squeezes his shoulder, stopping him, summons the strength to speak himself.
Our mistress will know justice.
Skara looks at the ground, bites her tongue, tries to hide the guilt on her face, but fails. Papi Horgor's jaw twitches as if holding back a smile.
If the accused hath nothing to say, she may confess her guilt before Christer and be granted a quick death.
Skara swallows, keeps her eyes on the ground.
If the accused does not confess, she will be judged by the kettle.
Skara glances at the kettle. It boils over the rim and sizzles on the fire beneath it. She stays on it a fearful moment, then casts her eyes down once again. The priest is just fine with her non-answer. He nods to Bjorn and Ulf.
Dust.
The men seize her arms and lift her to her feet.
I will confess.
Papi Horgor holds up his hand. The men release her. She straightens up, lifts her chin, readies herself. Bjorn draws his sword and steps behind her. In the crowd, a little girl buries her head in her mother's tunic. The mother takes her face in her hands, turns her eyes back towards Skara.
Thou must bear witness, child.
The accused will speak her sins.
Bjorn lifts his sword. Skara shudders as he sets its point at the base of her neck, ready to drive it through her spine as soon as Horgor gives the command.
I confess.
Papi Horgor looks at Bjorn, ready to give the nod. Skara meets the little girl's eyes, watches as they fill with tears. She makes a decision.
I confess to not, but for being the ward of a lustful, wrathful priester.
Enough.
His rushed attempt at speech seems to have started a fit. Skara takes advantage and keeps going.
I confess to trying to protect my sister for the same and to failing her.
The young boy looks from Papi Horgor to Skara and back again, decides to follow the priest's example.
Enough!
I confess to being born to a world where I has less worth than a mule.
Bjorn tenses, grips his sword tighter, looks to the priest for permission.
Papi.
Papi Horgor starts toward her.
Where my only prospect was to be married by the church and to be raped by the Christer himself.
Papi Horgor strikes her across the mouth with his crucifix. She catches herself from falling, stays on her knees, gives him a defiant stare as blood pours from her mouth.
And I confess to my grief at betraying my mistress.
She glances up at Bjorn, his sword still held at her neck.
Dust.
Nay. The kettle.
The boy nods, addresses the crowd.
The accused will be judged by our just and wrathful God. Should the Lord find her innocent, we trust he will protect her. Shouldst he find her guilty of her crimes, and the flesh be boiled from her skin, she will be broken on the wheel, her body left to the birds as a warning to all who would set witchcraft upon us.
Papi Horgor nods to Bjorn and Ulf. Bjorn sheaths his sword. They grasp her, pull her to her feet, walk her to the fire. She's stoic at first, proud. But as the heat hits her, the fear sets in. She tries to make a run for it, tries to yank her arms from their grip. It's no use. She's not going anywhere. Her breaths grow panicked. She shuts her eyes as Bjorn holds her tight. Ulf takes her left arm and plunges her hand into the boiling kettle. Skara's eyes snap open in agony as the scalding water blisters her hand. A few in the crowd look away. Ulf glances at Papi Horgor, looking for a command to stop. The priest gives him nothing. Skara's eyes roll into the back of her head, and her screams stop. A tense moment passes, completely silent save the water that bubbles around her wrist. Her eyes refocus, her mouth opens.
Nordon Pedrida!
Whoosh! A supernova of wind bursts forth from her. The fire flares up, the kettle goes flying, bodies are blown off screen, a tree snaps off at the middle. When the dust settles, not a person is left standing aside from Skara. Those behind her, Bjorn, Ulf, and Papi Horgor, were blown back against the church. They're not moving. The young boy was thrown into the street some 70 feet away. He too is still. The villagers who escaped unhurt, not many, gather themselves. Mothers take their children and flee. Others check on the less fortunate. Skara ignores them all. It's like her pain doesn't exist. She turns to the church, its door blown off its hinges, its thatch roof partially gone. She walks to Ulf, his head deflated, crushed by the stone wall on impact. She bends down with her one good hand, removes the axe from his belt. She turns to Bjorn, who lies unconscious a few feet away. Thwack! She ends him with a brutal one-handed swing. Screams and cries erupt from the villagers who remain. She fails to notice. Her eyes are on Papi Horgor, who moans from his crumpled position on the steps. He sees her approach, puts up a feeble hand in defense. Thwack! Scara cuts through his hand and buries the axe in his skull. She shifts her attention to the road. A few bodies lie still, including the young boy who is attended by a distraught mother. Others do their best to crawl or hobble from danger. The little girl who couldn't look supports her mother as she tries to limp away, cries of pain with each step.
Wait.
They turn to her. She stands tall in her blood-splattered shift, brain matter dripping from her axe. Her free hand raw and blistered. The mother's eyes betray terror.
No, I pray thee.
The girl places a comforting hand on her mother's arm. She looks at Scara not with fear but with awe, bordering admiration.
Nay, I will not harm you. But I had need of thy shoes.
Exterior Litlakoppinger outside the gates day. The gate explodes open and flies off its hinges. Scara steps through and onto the road, wearing only the mother's shoes and her shift. Her right hand clutches the axe, her left hangs at her side. She heads down the road toward the forest. Exterior streamside cliff day. Eigen trudges up the path along the gorge. A couple dozen men follow behind. They move slowly, held back by a few that have no business on a mountain. Some peer into the canyon as they walk, others fight off vertigo. They carry packs and weapons, but only a handful have swords. Axe and pitchforks arm the bulk of them. Eigen holds a sickle. He takes no comfort being in the lead. Something rustles off to his side. He startles, looks, sees nothing. Scans the trees. His eyes fall on the path that heads off into the forest.
ＨETHER, I think this is...
Shh.
Grom, directly behind him, glares, holds a finger to his lips. He puts a hand on Eigen's chest and pushes past him into the woods. Eigen lowers his eyes and follows after him. Exterior road day. Scara fords the stream, steps onto the opposite side of the road. The men's path into the woods is trampled and obvious. Exterior outside the glade day. Sunlight glints off Eigen's sickle as he creeps through the shadows at the edge of the glade. 6 others move around the perimeter, surrounding it. Grom is among them. The rest hang back in the woods, crushed behind trees and shrubs, sweaty hands gripping makeshift weapons. The men around the edge pause, hold their position. Eigen peers through the vegetation, scans the glade. It's quiet. Birdsong is all but absent. Even the bees are nowhere to be seen. At the house, a candle burns in each of the windowsills. Eigen looks to Grom, who signals with his free hand. The men step forward. 7 pairs of boots cross the obsidian line. They stop. Wait. Nothing happens. They take a few cautious steps toward the house. Their ears perk at buzzing. Impossible black clouds swarm from the beeskeps. They race toward the men in the glade and fly right past them into the woods. Exterior forest continuous. Cries of terror and pain erupt from the men in hiding as the bees smother them and drop them to the ground in writhing heaps. Exterior glade continuous. Eigen and the others stand transfixed in horror, trapped between the scene playing out in the forest and whatever terrors await in the house. Elsvarder drops from the sky, talons first, claws at a man's eyes. He drops to his knees, clutches his face, screaming. The raven moves on, tacks another, but this one is ready for him. He swipes his pitchfork, knocks the huge bird out of the air, stabs into the ground, and delivers the death blow. Exterior forest path day. 2 unscathed men sprint down the path, away from the glade. They slow as they reach the river gorge. Follow the trail as it turns along the cliff. The man in front stops at the edge. The man behind yells as he reaches it.
Go.
But then he sees what the man in front does. Scara stands on the cliff before them, only a few yards downhill. She glares.
Nordon.
Exterior forest day. Silence just outside the glade. The bees and the screams have died all in one. Exterior, the glade day. Eigen tightens his grip on the sickle, knuckles white. Only 6 of them are left now. He turns his attention to the house, its tiny windows with their burning candles. He spots a silhouette behind one of them.
Witch!
It disappears. He swallows. Anything but confident, he shouts again.
Come out and face judgment.
He waits. No answer. Grom takes over.
Thou hast sinned against God and against little carpenter. They'll just as easily break that door down.
Nothing. He nods to the other men. No question who's in charge now.
Dust.
He starts toward the house. The men follow. Whoosh! Giant balls of flame erupt from the candles and explode outward from all sides of the house. The fire engulfs the glade and every man inside it, sets alight their hair and clothing alike. Screams. One takes off running, makes the blaze burn even brighter. Another drops and rolls. It does little to help. Still another tries to disrobe, succumbs before he finishes. Eigen, Grom, and another spot the pool nearby. They sprint for their salvation and dive in head first. They thrash about to extinguish themselves. One comes up for air, finds his hair still smoking. He bends down, dips his head under for a second time. Grom leaves his head above water, hyperventilates, tries to soothe the burns that cover his body. Skin heavily charred, Eigen rises above the surface just as the house's door opens. Waldala steps outside, a scythe in hand. Death's face has been revealed, and she is a silver-haired woman. Eigen looks to the middle of the glade, to where he dropped his sickle in panic. He lunges out of the pool.
Friosa hecta!
The pool instantly turns to ice, freezing one man's head below the surface. Grom's entire body entrapping Eigen by his rear foot. Eigen's momentum carries him forward. He hits the ground hard as his foot stays locked in place.
Ugh.
Behind him, Grom panics.
I cannot move.
He squints his eyes, grits his teeth as he tries, the cold setting in all around him.
Help me.
His screams continue and grow more frantic as the man nearby struggles to move the only thing he can, his bent over waist. His head and hands below ice, he is suffocating fast. Waldala scans the glade. Singed tree limbs smolder, blackened corpses litter the ground. Swollen, bee-stung bodies lie around the forest edge. She spots Alsvarder's lifeless, broken form. Takes a moment. Eigen's burns are dire and painful, but he puts on the most courageous face he can.
Thou wilt burn all, witch.
Waldala turns to him, approaches him, unhurried.
I has the fear of fire.
Eigen bares his teeth. He knows where this is going, has no intention of begging. Waldala crouches to his level, just out of reach. She points to her face, mirroring the place of Eigen's scar.
I recognize ye. The last return to Little Cappinger, then?
Aye, and she hath been judged.
Then all I had feared hath already come to pass.
She stands.
Thou art a fool.
A fool with a scythe, no doubt.
Eigen's eyes dart to something behind her. She turns, follows them. A man who somehow escaped the bees has crept halfway the distance across the glade, an axe held ready to strike.
Limarilemia!
There's a crack as black roots burst from the earth. Grab the helpless man, jerk him back beneath the ground in an instant. His demise is marked only by a bare patch of dirt. Eigen closes his eyes. His heart breaks for every man that joined him today. Upstream from the frozen pool, water flows over the ice dam past the bent-over man who has since stopped moving. Grom sputters as it washes over his lips, begins to drown him. Waldala returns her attention to Eigen.
Ye are ready?
Eigen looks her square in the eye, accepting his fate. Waldala grips her scythe, readies herself to swing.
Nay.
Waldala turns, sees her apprentice crossing into the glade with an axe in one hand and burns covering the other.
Scara.
He must be judged.
Eigen's lips part. He takes in her blood-splattered shift, realizes all the death her appearance implies.
Nay.
Scara starts toward him, her voice grave and strong.
Eigen of Little Cappinger, thou hast been accused of hearsay. What had thou to say in thy defense?
What art thou doing?
Scara ignores and walks past her to Eigen's side.
Accused of heresy. By a devil's whore?
He spits at her feet.
Nay, Agen, by a child of the old ways.
Scara drives the axe through his ankle and doesn't quite sever it.
Ah!
Alas, it is hard with one hand.
She swings again and this time cuts through.
Ah!
Agen flails and clutches his now freed leg.
Go. Let the gods judge thy innocence.
Agen cries out as the blood gushes from his stump.
Curse thee!
She kicks him in the ribs, eliciting a painful grunt.
Go!
He gets on his hands and knees, grimaces, and whimpers as he crawls toward the edge of the glade. Scara catches her breath, watches as Agen disappears into the trees. Waldala looks at her in wonder.
Ye returned.
Scara nods, drops her axe to the ground.
I would ask some maid.
Aye.
She tosses her scythe next to Agen's severed foot. Interior hall day. Scara swallows her mead, takes a breath. Exhausted and still in plenty of pain, she sets the goblet on the table.
Gramercy.
Waldala sits across from her, eyes out the window.
That man outside, ye might have cut off his head and his foot. The wolves will just eat him come tonight.
Aye, they wilt.
Waldala regards her, sees the complete lack of remorse on her face.
Show me thy hand.
Scara lifts it above the table, shows her the browned, blistered skin.
Man loves to make its own monsters.
Is that what I am?
Nay, that is the hand of a witch.
The frown remains, but there's a hint of pride as she takes the goblet in her own disfigured hand, about to take a sip.
It is good I came back then.
Waldala stops before the cup hits her lips.
Good? Why is that good? Did I not say what would happen if you returned?
Waldala's words take a moment to register. As they do,
I was gone but a day. I came back to help thee.
A blood pact was broken.
tense silence. Scara chooses her next words carefully.
We wilt make it anew. I will be faithful and diligent.
Nay.
I am stronger. I will be better.
Too late for that.
Scara nods, moves to stand.
Then I will go.
Ye wilt not.
Scara freezes.
Do ye not understand?
Waldala looks back out the window, blinks away a couple tears, not keen to show them.
I would have ye go live in peace, but it is the weavers who have brought ye hither.
The weavers.
Aye, and they demand their price.
Curse them then.
Gera!
She glances at the ceiling as if it might collapse on them.
What does it matter if we are in agreement? Curse thee as if ye would let me into thy home but to smite me.
I had long been cursed.
Aye, and thy daughter along with thee.
A resentful moment passes between them.
When ye are ready, we would go into the field and duel like witches of days past.
I am to duel with a single spell.
Take the axe if you wish, but that is the way of things.
The way of things.
Aye,
You sound like the church I left behind me.
and yet ye begged to apprentice me for want of my freedom.
I was wrong. Ye art far from free.
Enough. We go anon.
Nay,
Stand.
I hold no grudge against thee.
I will notify the weavers.
If art thou to kill me, then let it be murder.
Waldala lashes out, digs her fingernails into Scara's injured hand.
Ye will fight me.
Nay!
Scara grips Waldala's hand, tries to pull it from her own. Waldala digs her nails in harder, bares her teeth.
Stand.
Tears form as Scara's cries give way to sobs.
Nay, mistress!
Waldala releases her.
I am not thy mistress.
She stands tall and Scara meets her eyes. They are steadfast, callous. We watch as Scara's heart breaks, the betrayal far worse than any pain she's endured.
Ye understand.
Scara looks away, sucks in a bitter breath of air.
Then let us get on with it.
Scara nods, gets on her feet as Valdala goes for the door.
Ye really art a little imp.
Scara watches her with the same calcified, hateful face she bore as she wielded her axe against Eigen and the others.
Valdala.
Valdala turns around.
Nordon vedreda!
Whoosh! A gale of wind blows Valdala back with brutal force. She crashes through the wall, flies across the workroom, through the heavy exterior wall at the back, a sickening crunch accompanying her. Her limp body hits the grass outside and tumbles several times over. Daylight streaks through the settling dust. Scara stands fixed in a spiteful daze, her eyes on the jagged holes in the walls. Blood leaks from the nail marks on her blistered hand. Her breasts are heavy, hostile, her face full of contempt. She wipes away her tears. There's no more need for them. Exterior, the glade day. Scara pushes the door open and steps outside. She looks to where Valdala's body lies in a gnarled, unnatural heap, 50 feet beyond the edge of the house. Clothes on. Scara's hand checking her breath on Valdala's lips. She's dead. Scara takes Valdala's hand, but not in mourning. She pulls the obsidian ring from her finger. Cut to. Scara grips the knob of the dark door. Cut to. Scara pulls a book from a shelf. Then the map case. Exterior, cliffside, tomb day. Scara kneels a few feet away from the boulder before the open, leather-bound tome.
Risa smidela.
The boulder rumbles and moves out of the way. Screams echo from inside the cave. Interior, tomb day. Scara drags Valdala's broken body into the tunnel. She sets it down, kneels, pulls the blood-inked scroll from her tunic and lays it out in the light. She takes a knife, cuts open her thumb, and paints her blood across Valdala's lips, places her hand over her eyes.
Kongik Bapa.
Valdala sucks in a breath of air. The pain hits. She flails and recoils at the suffering caused by each hideous movement, her voice joining chorus with her daughters. Her eyes go wide on seeing Scara.
Scara, the weavers! Ye defy them!
The screams go on as Scara stands.
I weep for Miss Selvin.
She pulls Valdala's wand from her belt, tosses it on the ground before her.
Embrace thy pain. Find a way to end it all.
She casts a glance down the cave in the direction of Valdala's daughter, then turns and heads for the opening. Exterior, cliffside, tomb day. The screams die as the boulder grinds back into place, leaving behind the sounds of chirping birds, running water, and rustling leaves. Scara stands, picks up the book, turns to the forest. She freezes in her tracks. A wolf stands not far away, staring. Blood covers its snout. She locks eyes with it. They stay that way, still, tense, until the wolf finally looks away. Scara walks on by it into the woods, not a trace of fear about her. She pauses after a moment, glances back, makes a clucking noise with her tongue. The wolf looks up, trots toward her. Scara turns and heads back toward the glade, with the wolf following after. Breathe out.
So that's it. Thank you so much to everybody for checking this out. It's an honor to have you spend your Friday evening with us. A massive, massive thanks to this amazing cast. They did such a great job. Thank you so much to everybody who's been a part of this series and supported it. I highly recommend that you follow everybody involved. Once again, their social media info is in the description below. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful night.